afternoon. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello, sorry I'm not on video this week, but I'm getting a new camera.
Okay, we'll look forward to that.
And
Okay,
you
but
should hear me really well because I've now hooked up a professional microphone with Jenny's help.
all right, very good. Thank you, Jenny. Okay. Dave, I received a phone call over the weekend from, I guess late last week, from a friend that I hadn't heard from in months who lives in right outside of London. And she was telling me about some horrific atrocity that happened over there. A 17-year-old kid wielding a knife went in and killed three children and wounded eight people in a children's dance class. And I hadn't heard about it, but it kind of raised
Oh,
my,
it's all over the British papers.
yeah, she said it was a big deal. And when I had a chance to dig into it, I saw that, wow, not only was it a crazy atrocity, but the story behind the story is that there were all kind of online rumors about the perpetrator being an undocumented immigrant, when in fact that was not the case. Uh, but apparently, the rumor mill got going on social media, and all kinds of right-wing groups decided not just to protest, but to actually riot and cause all kind of violence in multiple cities and townships in England. And it just kind of, just made me, again, something we've talked about a lot, Dave, and that is, how do you control that kind of lies and misinformation? And I'll even call it hate speech because it's targeted towards.
I will guarantee
Yeah,
you it's hate speech.
yes,
There's no two ways about it. And
yeah,
when you finish talking, I'll give you some details.
yeah. And this particular hate speech was targeted towards a Muslim. The guy perpetrator may in fact be Muslim. I'm not clear based on the story that I'm reading, but they accused him. This is the online misinformation. He accused him of being an undocumented Muslim immigrant, even though the British government quickly put out stories that said that he was born and raised in Great Britain. He was not an immigrant at all.
And I don't think he was Muslim either, but I'm
Wow,
not 100% sure on
wow.
that.
Uh,
And
you got some background about the guy, one of the guys that actually jumped on the story and started to inflame it.
it is really, really ugly. And the new government is doing the right thing, but it's hard for them. Something on the order of 50 cops, remember, most English cops do not carry weapons,
Hmm.
were injured by people who literally did things like break into police stations.
Mm.
They also did things like throw a firebomb into a hotel that had a lot of immigrants. This is the kind of utter and total hateful racism that we've seen in other countries at times. But I didn't think it was that bad in England. But it's
Yeah.
been going on for several days. And the most visible person in this, he's all over Twitter, spreading false rumors and, according to the British press, inspiring people to go out and beat up cops and anything else. Actually, I think inspiring people to beat up Muslims, and if the cops try to protect the Muslims, then they beat up the cops too.
Is this person identified, Dave? Do we know who this guy is?
He's a very well-known leader in the right wing, in the far right wing in England,
Hmm.
and he happens to be doing it all from France. And he said, "Oh, I'm in France because I was on vacation," but he didn't come home, and he didn't lead his people.
And
The
what is there one particular social media platform or another he's been using to to spread
Twitter.
the stuff?
And Twitter is mostly not censored these days.
Mm-hmm.
It's consciously allowing you to send porn, incidentally.
Yeah, Twitter is right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Musk doesn't want to send. This is something that I've been totally unclear about the right and wrong for a decade now.
Yeah,
When I realized just how bad the hate speech goes, and being an unlimited free speech advocate, I don't know if I am anymore.
yeah,
And this is the kind of thing that is happening. There were numerous people who died in Bangladesh and in India uh, because they this was a minority group that the Bangladesh army said were terrorists, and they just sent the army in there and killed people probably by the thousand.
mm,
And then some of them made it to India, where they were attacked by the Indians, who no longer allow Muslim refugees to ever become a citizen. Christian refugees are welcome, but
wow.
not Muslims.
Wow.
They
So
actually,
now,
that's actually the law in India for the last few months.
what role, if any, did the hate speech play in that particular atrocity, Dave?
All the hate that was being affected and literally wound up with a large number of people killed. And this was first reported to, or the first place I saw it, this is about 2 years ago, was in the New York Times, usually a fairly reliable source, although it does get some things wrong. And we could go into that too, because I've got a good story on that. But yeah, it was all over social media. The social media would say, this 14-year-old girl was raped by a Muslim. We got to go do something to protect the Hindus, and we have to do something about the Muslims in our town. And everybody knew that was a call for violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you moderate that stuff, Dave? I mean, you and I have talked about this on the show for almost 10 years now. And I know, in our early conversations, you started out as a free speech advocate. I know you talked about your grandpa reading Mein Kampf.
My
Uh,
grandpa, the Orthodox rabbi.
yeah, the Orthodox rabbi, right, reading Mein Kampf, saying, you had to know, how the other side thought and what they were thinking, and that there should be free and open speech on platforms such as the internet. But over the last 5 years or so, it has gotten so virulent and so just toxic. And as we see these couple examples that we just talked about, folks in England, in multiple cities across England, and now you're talking about Bangladesh and India being incited by misinformation and in some cases outright lies. Uh, didn't it used to be, Dave, that you could not print a lie in the newspaper? Wasn't there some uh,
Actually, in the
libel law that
US,
that that prevented that?
no, not if
No,
it was going about a public official. It was true. It still held true on private people, and
I see.
much of
Okay.
this was private people.
Hmm.
But I
You
would
couldn't you couldn't
assume,
lie about public officials.
and I assume it would apply about somebody who was accused of murder in newspapers
Hmm.
falsely. Uh, and England has much stricter rules than we do.
Hmm.
And the new prime minister in England said something will have to be done about this man and what he's saying. What that amounts to and how you do it, it was always possible to censor the internet. 30 years ago, where people were saying, you can't censor the internet. We just route it. If there's any blockage, we just route around it. Because remember, the internet at the very beginning was designed to stay alive if the US had a nuclear attack.
Right.
Uh, it wasn't true then, and certainly not true now. And I actually had talked about that in a different radio show when one of my colleagues there said, "You can't do it. We just reroute." And I said, "Of course you can do it. Because the government can send in the cops to arrest people," which absolutely could be. They've arrested hundreds, incidentally, on this, and they're taking it seriously.
You're talking about in England now?
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I mean, that's probably the rioters that they have arrested.
Yes.
It sounds like they have not arrested the perpetrator of the misinformation that, as you said earlier, is right now sitting in France, putting out all this stuff on Twitter.
And I don't have any answers on that,
Hmm.
but
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
the
who
kind of
does?
thing that we should know is
Who
going
does?
on and
Yeah.
affects.
This is something that we got to keep our eye on because, I'm sure we're going to see more and more of that in this country as well as across the globe. But now you had another story, Dave, talking about media and media bias within the media itself that you wanted to bring to the air. What was that about?
Uh, the New York Times, which I used to read cover to cover, and I probably read even more on the web, is the best newspaper in the world by far. They have 1,000 reporters. Most of them are excellent. They just had an excellent story about how the Chinese were getting around the US blockade on chips that were good for artificial intelligence. And they actually went to Shenzhen and bought some and did 85 interviews for the story. Perfectly sensible story. The story was very wrong, however, in the other stuff in the story. The
Also,
first,
also, Dave, break that down for us.
okay, that there definitely are some chips being smuggled into China, sure. But the story, when they talked about what was going on, got several things wrong. The only chips that matter to the Chinese are the most advanced chips coming from NVIDIA called the H100.
Mhm.
The second level, which H100 is replacing, is called the A100. And that, for example, was used to create ChatGPT-4. So this is pretty powerful stuff. The Chinese, Huawei, in fact, are able to produce chips comparable to the A100 by the million, they've proven. They're using most of those chips for 5G cell phones because the US was blockading Huawei. But Huawei is also making and selling AI chips that are equal to the second best in the world. So that the blockade that we have, and she wrote about it as though it was really going to make a difference, that we're going to hold back the Chinese military and hold back their AI, was utter and total nonsense. Because the Chinese are now able, and have proved they're able, to produce the chips. And even if their chips are only half the speed, well, when they have millions of chips, that they work around that.
Mhm. Yeah,
The
put two chips in the place of one, and you're up to speed.
Yeah, now you can't do that in a cell phone because it has to be spoil and not take power. So it
Mhm.
matters on the cell phones. Of course, $50 billion of sales to Huawei, which they were going to the number one in the world in cell phones. And they disappeared until they started producing their own cell phone chips about 9 months ago. And they produced millions of them. So I know they can do the AI chips. The second was, it was, and some of her sources, most of her sources, were the US Security Service and their friends. you could tell, and uh, because I know what's going around Washington, and it turned out that it is true that there are some real story of the best chips going into China. It is not true that it's going to make any significant difference to anything in the military, although our Secretary of Commerce, who's in charge of the program, says it would. And the New York Times reporter picked that up. Everybody in Washington
Yeah,
thinks that's
David,
true.
I can't help but feel now, maybe I'm a little politically naive, but to me, there seems to be such an undercurrent of racism in terms of all this anti-Chinese rhetoric. We haven't had any kind of military conflicts with the Chinese. As far as I know, I haven't seen the Chinese
We're looking for one.
interfering militarily in any of our spaces around the globe.
They did send a few balloons over the United States.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, to me, it's just an economic power. And my sense, again, is that if this kind of technological development was happening with the European countries, say Germany, I don't think we'd have anywhere near the amount of pushback and hysteria that we do with the Chinese. I may be reading a little into it, but I don't think so. I think a big part of the story is that this is a big, huge non-white superpower, and America, white America in particular, is scared to death of it. Now, maybe I'm reading more into it. What's your take
Well,
on
I
it,
can
David?
give you a whole lot of data points that would lead Pete to the conclusion you just gave.
Hmm.
In fact, let me give you two of them. There was a pretty good article by Kate Metz, who actually did a good book on artificial intelligence. And the headline was something that, in many ways, China is pulling ahead or is caught up.
Hmm.
That's true. I've looked at that in depth. I could do an hour show on what the US is ahead in and what the Chinese are ahead in. It adds up to it's about the same. That's the facts. And Cade got it mostly right, although it wasn't as clear as I'm putting it. 2 months ago, another reporter in the Times, who has a good reputation, wrote a story about how the Chinese could never catch up with us. And the evidence of that was one of the, or a number of people in Washington saying so. Government and the secret end of the government. And I've talked to some of those people. It said they could never catch up. And what was the one particular thing that they said? They said, oh, yes, there's this good large model in China, but they couldn't have done it without the United States. And what happened there is they got it done fast because they went with the open source Llama. I guess that would be Llama 2 at that point. And that proved that the Chinese were dependent on the United States. Well, what that reporter didn't know is that Llama was written in Paris.
Hmm.
It was paid for by Facebook, but it was done by the Facebook people in Paris who were very good. Paris has a lot of good people now. And
So,
so,
so much of the scientific, if not most of the scientific research and development that goes on in the world, Dave, is kind of like, open, it's an open book. I mean, my sense is that the scientists don't have the political boundaries in their thinking that government does. And that if a scientist has a breakthrough in a given language model or given development and AIs, it's going to permeate across the globe. I mean, I don't know how you can put boundaries, political, geofence, technological development. To me, that's just totally unrealistic.
And I can confirm that nearly every senior scientist in AI has made a visit to China in the last few years,
Hmm.
talking at a conference or something. They've all had reason to go. The most distinguished scientist in artificial intelligence in the world, which is Demis DeepMind, which is part of Google in London, and Bengio, who is in Montreal, and didn't want to take a job in the United States because he happens to be French. No, not Bengio. Kuhn didn't want to take. Bengio is Israeli working in Canada, and Hinton is a Brit now working in Canada because he left his job at Carnegie Mellon in the United States because the only way to get money for artificial intelligence research, we're talking 15 years ago, was to do work for the US Department of Defense, and he didn't want to do it. Now, the reason I put those people there is that they both signed 2 open letters or petitions, all 3 of them, and have done a lot of action about the dangers of AI, which is a whole nother thing. Those same open letters had numerous people that they co-signed it with from Beijing, in particular from Tsinghua University.
Hmm.
And that's the way almost everybody. The only people who are trying to keep things secret right now are a couple of companies, and they're not doing it because of China. They're doing it because OpenAI doesn't want Google to know, and Google doesn't want OpenAI to
Yeah,
know.
to protect their profits. That's a whole nother
Yeah,
thing.
but it's not working very well
Hmm.
because, among other things, there is this culture. You do something great, you want to get credit, and you want to share it with the world. So you write a paper.
Right.
So even if the official policy of the company is not to put it out there, it gets around.
Hmm.
And another thing that people don't know there is that even if that weren't, it wouldn't work because people are changing jobs constantly in
Hmm.
AI. One of the founders of OpenAI, a few days ago, took a job at Anthropic, one of their biggest competitors. And before he was the founder of OpenAI, he was at Google. And when I look at what people have done, you know, this guy was at Google and he left and he's now at Apple. And again and again, right now, anybody in AI, we're talking about PhD levels with experience, can get a job paying between $200,000 and $600,000. So they can leave anytime they feel like it. And the culture there is, oh, we need people. If this person was working for our top competitor for the last 3 years, we'll take them anyway.
Yeah, yeah,
And they're
yeah,
mostly hymns, which is
yeah.
another thing,
It's
although
clearly
there's some important women.
yeah, a global marketplace clearly for all this
It's
stuff.
what academia was supposed to be, particularly in medicine, and
Hmm.
sometimes is. And the total culture in AI and all the people in AI until 6 or 7 years ago were at the universities is like you dream of the universities on research. Now, do we have time for another story or should we take our break?
No, I think we can take our break here, Dave. I know you mentioned Google. We got a big story on Google coming up after the break. A big antitrust decision by the U.S. government pronouncing Google as a monopoly, which many of
And
us
the
now.
judge just agreed with him
Yeah.
yesterday.
Okay. So this is Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break.
Look at me. as helpless as a kitten up a tree, and I feel like I'm clinging to a cloud I can't understand. I get misty just holding your hand. Walk my way, and 1,000 violins begin to play, or it might be the sound of your hello, that music I hear. I get misty whenever you're near. Can't you see that you're leading me on? But it's just what I want you to do. Don't you notice how hopelessly I'm lost? That's why I'm following you, following you on my own. Would I wander through this wonderland alone, never knowing my right foot from my left, my hat from my glove? I'm too misty and too much in love. Can't you see that you're leading me on? But it's just what I want you to do. Don't you notice how hopelessly I'm lost? That's why I'm following you on my own. Would I wander through this wonderland alone, never knowing my right foot from my left, my hat from my glove? I'm too misty and too much in love, too much in love, too misty and too much in look at me.
Okay, we're back. Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM. Dave, there's a big announcement I think yesterday, where a federal judge ruled that Google is a monopoly and charged it with illegally cementing its dominance by paying companies like Apple, Samsung, and others billions of dollars a year to have Google automatically handle search queries on their smartphones and the web. Big antitrust ruling, one of the biggest ones in about 20 years, according to this New York Times story.
No, it's one of the big. Well, there was one big antitrust in the 25 years ago or 30 years ago, but only one.
That was
And
Microsoft.
basically,
Mhm.
that's Microsoft. Uh, and basically, antitrust was killed in the 1980s. But we did, and we can go there if you want to. Well, I'm looking for, because I have it here.
Mhm.
What did you, here it is. Judge Maida, in his 276-page decision, released Monday, wrote, Google is a monopolist and has acted as one to maintain a monopoly, blocking the competitors being able to be put on cell phones for practical purposes. And this is
Yeah,
welcome.
I'm looking at some of the story too, David. The Justice Department, this is the Federal Justice Department, said that Google search engine conducted nearly 90% of web searches. That's a
Confirmed.
huge number. And of course, we know that, Google, the word Google, whereas it was originally and still is the name of a company, it really has turned into a verb. Google
Yes, you
this,
don't have to put a
Google,
capital letter on it when you
yeah,
use
Google
it.
that, yeah. Same way, going back a couple of generations, us older folks might remember the Xerox machine. They used to say Xerox this, Xerox that. Xerox became synonymous with copy.
I need a
They were so
Kleenex.
dominant back in the early days of copy technology. So Google's has assumed the same dominance now. Google this means, search. So I mean, they are thoroughly dominating the search market, and they got called on it by the feds. Now I don't know. I don't think there's been any discussion about remedy yet, Dave. But the government sounds like they made a pretty good case talking about the billions of dollars that Google pays to make sure that they are the automatic search engine on consumer devices, and they're
Like
paid for their
half the cell
dominance.
phones in the United States that aren't. Oh no, actually, 95% of the cell phones in the United States. Apple is half the cell phones in the United States,
Hmm.
and nearly all the rest are Android from Google,
Hmm.
which gives them, and they know it, and it was utterly clear. And they even were saying it publicly 10 years ago that this was the heart of how they became one of the most profitable companies in the world. They would not have lost this antitrust case 5 years ago.
Why do you say that, Dave? Because the market power has shifted, or the political winds?
Political end.
Hmm.
The
Now,
history on
this case was originally brought under the Trump administration, I believe.
maybe, but it wouldn't have been followed through. You're right about that, I believe. And actually, uh, Vance, Trump's vice president, agrees with the Justice Department. He said, in particular on this, Lena Khan is doing a good job, but it's highly unlikely that Trump is going to go against big companies, except that the right wingers think that Google and Apple and so on are prejudiced against them, and think they have to do something about that. But that's the only part they care about, including Trump.
Yes, it's going to be
So
interesting. I mean, those guys. I'm talking about the tech sector, in particular, Google, and their cabal, if you will, all the folks that they are in cahoots with in terms of moving that money around. They have such huge market power and such huge deep pockets in terms of what they can mount in terms of lobbying. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of remedy the Justice Department comes up with. Do you think they might break them up? I mean, how could they even remedy that?
Well,
If we rewind, let me just give a quick example for our audience because you and I have been around so long, Dave. We remember this. You and I remember when there was one phone company in the United States. It was called AT&T, and there might have been a few small regional companies here and there, but for the most part, AT&T dominated the entire country. And then in 1984, Judge Green, a federal judge again, called them a monopoly and broke up the then one giant phone company into I think see the 7 or 8 regional bell companies, broke them up, and
well,
made the regional companies compete against each other. Now, of course,
no,
in
no. In long distance, they did, but Verizon and AT&T, which at that point was called SBC, had sworn they would both go across the country. And I heard the CEO of SBC on Wall Street, I was actually at the event
Mhm.
listening to him, say, yes, we were going to, our national local plan will go across the country.
Yeah, but that evolved, Dave. I mean, that evolved
That it
initially.
disappeared.
Yeah,
Neither of them did any
initially
of it.
AT&T did not own SBC. That was an
No,
acquisition that happened.
SBC bought AT&T
Yeah, exactly,
because AT&T couldn't compete, it turned
exactly.
out.
Right, right.
Uh, but yeah, that wasn't because the judge decided. I say that because while Judge Green was pretty strong and wouldn't dismiss the case, according to people who know, and I read one book written by one of the people who was involved, what happened there is that Charlie Brown, the CEO of AT&T, thought he could make a killing in the computer market. That AT&T, which remember that's where Unix comes from,
Mm.
and the US phone switching system was probably, almost definitely at that point, the largest computer in the world outside the Defense Department. And they had Bell Labs, and they were sure they would make a fortune if they went into the computer business. Turned out they totally failed, but Brown accepted the breakup because he thought he would make more money after the breakup
Mm.
and said so publicly. So we can't say the judge did that one.
Well,
On this, we can say the
I
judge
would
did because
disagree
we're
with you
quoting the
somewhat, Dave.
judge.
I think the judge started a whole cascade of events that resulted in yeah, it was initially long distance, but then it resulted in all these regional bells coming together, being developed, Bell Atlantic, SBC, Ameritech, Bell South. There were a bunch of them that became very strong powerhouses within their own region. And then, true to capitalist model form, they began to merge with each other. And SBC slash Verizon ended up buying up half the country, and Verizon bought up the other half. So now we got pretty much a duopoly between these two giant phone companies.
It's
Uh,
actually a three-way one because
who's number three?
T-Mobile, they were both charging so much. The T-Mobile came in a few years ago
Okay, but
at a lower price and now is
they're
eating
wireless
them.
only. I don't think they have
The wireless is the
based,
only
do they?
one that adds up to dollars now. Well, no, the
Mm-hmm.
wireless is more than half the market.
Mm-hmm.
And T-Mobile did something totally unexpected. Sprint couldn't do it. They tried a few times. AT&T and Verizon got so greedy that T-Mobile very consciously cut the prices to about 15-20% less than Verizon and AT&T, who had been acting like a cartel, all of them,
Right.
and wound up, and still at 15% less was very profitable. Back then I was writing about how the US wireless companies are some of the most profitable companies in the world. And then T-Mobile, which is owned by Deutsche Telekom, had some excellent technical people who built a better network than Verizon or AT&T. Took about 5 years to do it, but it was a remarkable achievement. And during that time, Verizon and AT&T, in order to make their quarterly numbers and keep their dividends up, cut their spending on the network. And that left room for T-Mobile, which is exactly what you would expect if you really had competition. It's one of the few cases where three carriers have had real competition. France is the other one.
Okay, but Dave, are we going to see that type of restructuring and competition emerge in search and in the internet space that's so dominated by Google and a couple other companies, Google and Meta, if you will, between Google, Meta, and Apple. I mean,
And Microsoft.
yeah, and Microsoft. I mean, is there any way that the Justice Department, you know, maybe there's a way, but is it at all feasible or likely? What do you think they're going to do? I guess that's the question. I'm just kind of
Well,
throwing it out there. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but where might it go?
well, I know what's being talked about that makes sense to me.
Hmm.
First of all, it is probably going to be impossible to get rid of Google's domination of search. Why I say that so clearly is because the Europeans forced Google to allow more competition in a few years ago, fined Google billions, and their market share was barely touched because there's nobody else except Microsoft doing search who can compete. Google is that much better, that much bigger.
Hmm.
Remember, Google is a $2 trillion company that makes so much money that they gave to their shareholders by buying back stock, $60 billion in the last 2 years. That's how profitable they are. And they have many of the best engineers in the world. They blew it on AI because they were getting a little too cocky. But they came back. At this point, Google has come back into the lead. But it's going back and forth between about 5, 6 companies, 2 of which are in China. But what can happen? Well, Google bought DoubleClick, the major ad serving company, which was in New York, Madison Avenue, and was the primary competitor for Google search ads. And they bought that about 10 years ago. There's a second antitrust case scheduled to go to court in September about monopoly, de facto monopoly or market power in the ad business. And the Justice Department is in that one very strongly saying that because Google and Facebook have a near monopoly on the internet ads, they're charging more. That may happen, and there's an easy way to remedy that. You can force, just like AT&T gave up Verizon, you could force Google to give up DoubleClick. In the case of Facebook, they have Instagram. Oh, and Google has YouTube. They have Instagram and WhatsApp. They spent $30 billion, I think it was, yeah, for WhatsApp, even though at that point, WhatsApp wasn't worth a fraction of that. But they actually found the emails inside Microsoft where Zuckerberg or somebody like him was saying, these guys might be competition. We can't let that happen. We got to do something. And they spent $30 billion to take over a company that was worth maybe a tenth of that.
Wow.
Because Microsoft was also trying to take over the same one.
Yeah, I mean that is such classic monopolist behavior.
Yeah.
Buy up your competitor at any cost to ensure your market share.
Or whatever it takes to get the competitor not to compete hard. And we've both been in the phone business for a long time, and we know by and large nobody can compete. That was why it was so surprising that T-Mobile broke that all. But T-Mobile has been raising prices since then, and wants to. Deutsche Telekom CEO has never seen a price increase he didn't support.
Well, we'll see what happens. This is something that we're certainly going to keep close attention to, and we'll come back to the story once the judge has come back with a proposed remedy and see what happens. But now, Dave, there's another phone story that came to our attention regarding cell phones in prison and an apparent ruling by the FCC commissioner. Apparently, in the state of Georgia, the Attorney General sent a complaint to the FCC complaining that incarcerated individuals were orchestrating crimes from inside prison. And this Attorney General, his name is Christopher Carr, proposed that the FCC jam cell phones of incarcerated folks as a way to kind of stop this illegal behavior from happening. Apparently, a number of crimes, including murder, that have been orchestrated by folks as they sat in prison on their cell phones.
And well, they could have just had their wife come in or their girlfriend and pass the word, as is very common, not just in movies, in reality.
Yeah, I mean, pre-cell phone. I don't think folks in prison giving orders and orchestrating stuff outside of prison is anything new.
There's been loads of cases over the years.
But now technology is playing a role in this, and
it's pure politics on this.
Well, I mean,
he wants to look tough on crime, and he says, "Oh yeah, we can."
The FCC has said they don't have jurisdiction.
The FCC went even further than that. It was a state that wanted to put in the blocker, which is in general illegal to block the airwaves because you're knocking out people's cell phones. Mm-hmm. A lot of prisons have been doing that the last few years. And the FCC, that's Jessica Rosenworcel, who's on the right side of almost everything, said, oh no, the law says you can't block the spectrum, so you can't do this without going to Congress and getting the law changed. Before that, the state of Georgia, and I'm sure there are at least a dozen other states doing it, were just going ahead and blocking. Remember, there are 2 million human beings in cages in the United States. Not even China.
That's a heck of a travesty right there.
China has 4 times our population. They have fewer people in jail. The Europeans have half or a third as much.
Yeah.
And we know who goes to jail, and we know how unfair the entire system is. I keep using the example, 90% of the people in jail for drugs are people of color. Mm-hmm. Numerous studies over the year have said that about half the people heavily using drugs were not people of color. But guess who gets arrested?
Yeah, folks that look like me. Yeah.
Yep, and there was no problem in the fancy university we went to. I knew 2 white guys you could get any drug from. In fact, they were working out of Frank Hogan, who had been district attorney and was close to a cover. His old fraternity house was the source of drugs once upon a time.
Not surprising. So the FCC essentially punted on this one, Dave, is what I can see. Just saying that they're not at liberty to authorize the use of jammers. So I don't know if the states are going to defy. I mean, what the FCC's statement is not a ruling per se. I guess they were looking for her to somehow give them permission to sidestep federal laws. What does the FCC's commissioner's statement? I mean, that has no effect in terms of behavior of the state, does it?
Yeah, because there actually is a federal law that says you cannot interfere with other people's use of their cell
Okay.
phones
So she
by
just
putting
understood
jammers
that.
in Spectrum.
Mhm.
It wasn't, they weren't thinking about prisoners at that point.
Mhm.
They were thinking about the different companies. And, a radio station used to be able to put a radio station on the Mexican border was able to put out 10 times as strong a signal as any radio station in the United States.
Mhm.
They could hear it, and this was AM, they could hear it in Chicago.
Mhm.
So there have been many issues about who gets access to the spectrum, and they actually have rules on this. Jessica's going to be out of office in a few months.
Mhm.
Uh, it, Even if Kamala Harris wins, who I'm sure respects Jessica, in fact, I know that they've worked on a few things together. The tradition is that the new president has a new FCC chief.
Mhm.
So Jessica is trying to clean up the things that she's been at the FCC for at least 25 years. That's when I first met her,
Wow.
1999. And she knows all of this stuff back and forth. And she's fought a lot of battles and actually won a few of them. She even won a few working with Republican Kevin Martin
Mhm.
when the Republicans had a majority and persuaded him to take a major decision about competition. Kevin, incidentally, was the most honest and courageous person I've met at the FCC, and I've met all but one of the commissioners in the last 25 years.
Okay, well that's going to be another show, Dave, as the election heats up and as we look at a new administration talking about what might happen with the FCC and what issues they might tackle and where that might go and how that might impact regular folks. But before
Let's
we go,
hope we don't have to think of that new administration. That's my personal opinion.
okay.
Although, as I say, Vance has just said Lena Khan, who at the Justice Department brought the Google monopoly suit, was doing a good job.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll see what happens. Well, we just got a couple minutes left, Dave. I just wanted to mention a story briefly that I saw going on. You're talking about south of the border, down in Argentina, where the government set up a special security unit to quote unquote patrol social networks and websites for the purpose of investigating crimes, to using image recognition to identify suspects, also to identify potential threats from criminal groups and to predict unrest. I mean,
Predicting a crime. Didn't they do a movie about that?
yeah. Tom Cruise was in. I can't remember the name of it, but yes, they
Minority
did.
Report, I think.
Yeah. There you go. Minority Report. That was it.
Argentina is doing that.
Mm-hmm.
They have a right-wing government because the left-wing government, after 15 years, they got so sick of how badly they were fouling up the economy that they voted for the right wing.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, across the world, for the last 5 years, the incumbents have been losing. In the United States, Biden beat Trump. In England, the Labour Party has been behind the Conservatives for 20 or 30 years, at least 20 years. They moved to the left. In Italy, it moved to a lady who was said by some people to admire Mussolini and definitely is far right. And in France, the right did much better than before. In Argentina, it was throw the bums out, and they moved from a sort of left government to a far right government.
I guess everybody's looking for ways to improve their lot, and there's so much misery and just so many poor folks, such a divide between the haves and the have-nots globally, and the middle class haves where they exist are struggling so hard to hang on that to me, my take, there's a lot of desperation going on that we see this flip flop in regimes.
Yeah,
But
and COVID really did that. I mean, Biden has actually done a very good job. He may be losing it at this point, but I objectively what they've done in 4 years, mostly because he trusted good people to do things like the
but we've
antitrust.
got to keep an eye on this use of technology, Dave, and what Argentina is doing. I'm hoping that doesn't catch on with other conservative governments where they're looking to patrol social networks with the idea and intent of identifying potential threats and predict unrest. That's a scary thought. But Dave, we're about out of time here.
I
Any
have to
parting?
apologize. I promised to tell you more about how Verizon wanted to charge a friend of mine $700 for $120 of service.
Mm,
And I managed to get them after 45 minutes on the phone and mentioning that I had friends at the FCC and things like that to agree that I was right, that she should have only been charged $120. I got that story and I have an equivalent one on Spectrum.
okay, well,
Next time.
okay, more to come. Okay, thanks, Dave. This has been Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. on 90.3 FM and on the web at WHCR.org. Tune in, just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.